Welcome to a new video on our channel. This time I'm going to make a tutorial on some software by Sonic Freaks. It's software that's used to control the Moog Cluster Flux Pedal, which is a very nice pedal that has been made by Moog. Well, we from Holland say Moog, and in America they say Moog, because it's a Dutch name. But well, anyhow, the pedal itself is a very nice pedal that you can use to make choruses and flanger type of effects, but you can also use it for some other effects like the bucket brigade delay. And normally you would use a pedal like a pedal, so just tweak the knobs, etc. But there are some settings on the pedal which are very inaccessible just by using the pedal alone. And this new application, which is only for the Mac, helps you very much to access those parameters by giving you full control on them, like the range of your delay and some other settings that are very useful to make special effects with the pedal. Apart from that, the application also gives you the opportunity to make presets and use them. So any settings that you tweak, you can actually recall and store using the application. As I said already, the application right now only exists on the Mac. But if you are a PC user and you would like to see this application also on Windows, then please write that in the comments, and Sonic Freaks can check whether they will make a Windows version too. When you have the pedal, and I'll show some of the settings a little bit later, you obviously have to connect it to your audio interface, at least if you want to use it inside of your DAW. I will show how to do that in Cubase, but many other DAWs also allow you to actually integrate external gear into the DAW, and that makes it accessible as if it was a plugin, which is really, really useful. And at the back of the device, we can see that it has a MIDI input, and that is what we use to integrate it into our system and connect it to the application. At this moment, I'm only using the audio input and the audio output. So after connecting the input and the outputs, connecting MIDI to your MIDI interface, which in my case is a Unitor 8, got a couple of them, then you're ready to go on with the configuration in the DAW. So as you can see, I have the application already open, but I'm going to switch to Cubase first. No, actually to the audio MIDI setup first, where I have actually assigned a MIDI port to the Cluster Flux Pedal. So I made a device using Add Devices right here. And then you can create actually a new device like Cluster Flux 2 or whatever. I already have it. And when you have that device, you can connect it to a port which actually makes it visible inside of your software as Cluster Flux 2. Well, I don't need the Cluster Flux 2, so I'll just delete that one. So my Cluster Flux is now on this port 8 of my big MIDI setup here, and that means that I can go to my DAW and make a new MIDI device. That MIDI device will be a new one. I'll just delete this one. I'll install a new device, define new, it's just some generic device. It has preset references and snapshots. I'm not quite sure what that actually does, just preset references. Cluster Flux, and then I can say OK. It shows me how it looks here. I don't need this. I'll move to the new installed device, which is called Cluster Flux, and I'll connect the Cluster Flux MIDI port to it, which now shows up in my assignments of MIDI ports. So now my Cluster Flux is known inside of Cubase, and I can go on with the audio side of the Cluster Flux. I've got a lot of inputs and outputs, and to actually assign that in your DAW, I'll go to Audio Connections, External Effects, and I'll say Add External Effect. This is called Cluster Flux. The send configuration is mono and the return is stereo, and I can immediately associate a MIDI device which is called Cluster Flux. When I do that, I get presented with the send bus and the return buses, and I'll have to assign an audio interface to that. So I'll choose my PCI 424, which is a mark of the unicorn. Old hardware, but it still works, and thus is a very cheap option to get a lot of inputs. Return device is the same thing, obviously, and there I have to choose my Cluster Flux left and Cluster Flux right. I can very well imagine that your interface does not have named inputs. The Motu interfaces do have that. So you would just choose the proper port on which you have connected your Cluster Flux. Okay, so now we actually have an external effect which we can assign as an effect in Cubase. So if we say add track effect, and we choose here Cluster Flux, then it shows up the external plugin, which is called Cluster Flux. Configuration stereo, I want it to my default stereo output, and I'll also name this thing here the effect Cluster Flux. So now we have an effect channel which is called Cluster Flux, and we can use it to send audio to. Now how does that sound? Right now I have a CS60 synthesizer. Let me check one thing more. The audio connections. I just created the effect. Another thing I can do is check user delay, and then it will send a ping to the device, and it will automatically update the latency, which you can see here. So it was 0 milliseconds and now it's 2.49, which is apparently the total return delay of my audio interface from output to input again. Okay, so now my Cluster Flux is set up. Right, the CS60. Right now it sounds like this. And I've only added a little bit of reverb and a little compressor on it. But imagine that I wanted to add the Cluster Flux itself to it. Then I can choose the send bus to send it to, and I'll send a lot of audio to it. I'm just going to put on my headphones so I can better hear what I'm doing. And as you can hear, there is now a flanger on it. So, if we have a look at the software itself, we can see what kind of settings we have there. Obviously, the software resembles the Cluster Flux itself very much. So it has the same controls as you have on the device itself, but also some controls that are not on the device, or ranges that are not on the device. Like, for example, the multiplier or the portamento setting. And especially these settings are very hard to get to. Now with this software, you don't need to fiddle around with combinations of different knobs on the device, but you can just enter them here and it'll be sent to the device using MIDI. Obviously, the software itself also needs to be set up, and that is being done by setting the MIDI channel and setting the MIDI input and output. I've set them both to this interface, which is called the Cluster Flux. Sounds a bit weird that there's also a MIDI input, but that's a virtual port, just like this one from Cluster Flux Editor. There's actually 2 virtual MIDI ports that are added the moment you install the software, so you can use separate applications with the same application. It's not a VSC plugin, it's a standalone application, but it works very well in conjunction with your DAW. Okay, so one of the things we see here is that we have all the controls of the device, as I said already, and we have presets. Now, to give you an idea of these presets, there are already 30 presets built into the software, and the other 70 you can actually assign yourself. Each of the controls here actually has a mouse over that tells you what it does. So if you just hover over it a little bit longer, you can see what it actually does. And if you want to store, for example, a preset, you can see that shift click stores the preset, and just clicking on it will retrieve the preset. So we have already heard the flanger, which is preset number 1. And if we switch another preset, you can immediately hear that this device can sound like both a flanger and a chorus. These are all very musical presets. They can be just added to any instrument, to voice, to whatever you have, your guitar, your bass. This is a very glitchy preset. It changes weird things on your sound. Let me just edit the sound on the CS60 so that it doesn't do this twing, 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 twing anymore. If we change the multiplier, it almost starts to sound digital. If we go even further, by changing it to 4, we get more and more own sounds from the device itself, which I can remedy a little bit by turning the feedback down. You can lock the mix setting. So if you have everything set to fully wet, because it's a send effect right now, you can just lock that setting. So if you modify the preset or if you change to another preset, it will keep on the same lock. Right now we have a very strong peaking sound which goes up and down. And what you could do is actually go to your DAW and change the EQ, which will show you where all the peaks are, and filter those peaks out of the signal. So that's one way where you could still use this pretty weird effect. Let's go to a more extreme setting, which is the A-time multiplier. So imagine that we wanted to store this. We just keep the Shift key pressed, and if we then click, then it will store this preset in this location. We already have this one, and now we can just go back to that same setting that we created, which would otherwise be lost in space because you tweak on the device and then you don't know exactly what the setting was anymore, and it's lost. But now with this application you can actually recreate it, just recall it. Well, there are many other things. You can actually set your mod wheel to LFO amount, and then you can use your mod wheel and send it to this application where you can modify the input, how much LFO amount should be used. And there are some other things. You can say, you can use MIDI notes to change the delay time. So you can actually play this application so that it makes its own sounds or modifies the effects by using MIDI notes to send it to this application. And you can also use MIDI notes to bypass the effect. Let's find out what else is in the presets of the Cluster Flux Editor. You can already hear it without me even playing something. So this is a rhythmic LFO with a random stepped LFO. All these shapes are in the device, but as you can see, there are also shapes that you cannot easily choose. There's like, on the device, there's 5 or 6 shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's a tap tempo. Well, that's also obviously also on the device. So that's a quick overview and a short tutorial on the Cluster Flux Editor by Sonic Freaks. But if you have the pedal itself, this is an absolute must to have, so you can use the full potential of the device, and you can integrate it in your studio even better. And you can also use it live even better, because you can easily switch between the presets, which you normally just don't have, and you have to tweak everything. So I hope you'd like this tutorial. Leave your comments below. And thank you very much. Till next time. Bye-bye.